The gentle ticking of the clock in our two-story house in suburban Boston seemed to echo the growing tension between Jacob and me. I'm Margot, and for the past 5 years, I've been working endless hours at a renowned architecture studio downtown. Every month, I bring home $10,000 to support our family's lifestyle. It's not easy, but I've always believed in doing what's best for us. Jacob, my husband of 7 years, used to be a successful investment banker. But after a series of bad decisions in the stock market, he's been relying more and more on my income. It's been tough watching him struggle, but what's even harder is how he seems to minimize my contribution. He acts as if money just appears out of thin air, never acknowledging the long nights I spend hunched over my drafting table or the weekends I sacrifice to meet deadlines. Last Tuesday, Jacob dropped a bombshell that would shake the very foundation of our relationship. I had just gotten home from a particularly grueling day at the office, my feet aching in my sensible heels, when he announced, without any prior discussion or warning, that his parents would be moving into our master bedroom. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Don't get me wrong, I've always been cordial with my in-laws. They're nice people, really. But the decision to put them in the most intimate space of our home without even consulting me felt like a betrayal. To make matters worse, this meant Jacob and I would be relegated to the tiny guest room downstairs. The one with the lumpy mattress and the window that doesn't quite close all the way. I tried to argue, to make him see reason. I described how much I contribute financially, how I sacrifice so much to keep our house in order. But Jacob just rolled his eyes, saying this wasn't my problem to solve. They're my parents, he said in a tone that brooked no argument, and this is my house too. This isn't up for discussion. I felt a stab of indignation rise in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Years of trying to keep the peace had taught me to pick my battles. So, I decided to hold my tongue, at least for the moment. Maybe if I gave him some time to think it over, he'd realize how unfair this all was. The next few days were a blur of tense silences and avoided glances. I threw myself into my work, staying late at the office to avoid coming home to the growing chaos. Jacob had started clearing out our bedroom, piling our belongings into cardboard boxes that lined the hallway. Every time I passed them, I felt a little piece of my heart break. On Friday night, I finally mustered up the courage to broach the subject again. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the remains of our takeout dinner spread out between us. I cleared my throat, my hands shaking slightly as I set down my fork. Jacob, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, I know you want to help your parents, and I respect that. But don't you think we should have discussed this together? This affects both of us, and I feel like my opinion doesn't matter to you. He looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed. What's there to discuss? They need a place to stay, and we have the room. End of story. I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. But it's our bedroom, Jacob. Our private space. And we're the ones paying the mortgage. Don't you think we deserve to have a say in who lives here? His eyes flashed with anger, and I instinctively leaned back in my chair. Are you saying my parents aren't welcome in our home? He snapped. No, that's not what I'm saying at all, I protested, feeling my carefully constructed argument crumbling. I just think we should have talked about it first. Maybe we could have found another solution that works for everyone. Jacob stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. There's nothing to talk about. They're moving in next week, and that's final. If you can't handle that, maybe you should find somewhere else to stay. With that, he stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me sitting alone at the table, surrounded by the remnants of our dinner and the shattered pieces of our once happy marriage. As I cleaned up the dishes, my mind raced with thoughts and emotions. How had we gotten to this point? When had Jacob stopped seeing me as a partner and started treating me like a subordinate? I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, the long hours, the missed vacations, the delayed dreams of starting our own family. All of it had been for us, for our future together. But now, it felt like that future was slipping away, replaced by a reality I didn't recognize and certainly didn't want. That night, as I lay awake in our soon-to-be former bedroom, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. But what could I do? The thought of leaving Jacob terrified me. We'd built a life together, and despite everything, I still loved him. Or at least, I loved the man he used to be. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I made a decision. I would try one last time to make Jacob understand. If that didn't work, well, I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. For now, I had to focus on getting through the day and finding the right moment to have this crucial conversation. Little did I know, that moment would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything in ways I could never have imagined. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind still spinning from the events of the previous night. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the heating system kicking in against the chilly Boston autumn. I padded downstairs to the kitchen, hoping a cup of strong coffee might help clear my head. As I stood by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life, I heard Jacob's heavy footsteps on the stairs. My heart rate quickened, and I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was to come. He entered the kitchen, his face a mask of determination. Without so much as a good morning, he thrust an empty cardboard box into my hands. "Start packing," he said, his voice cold and commanding. "My parents will be here this afternoon." I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "Jacob, please," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can't we talk about this?" But he was already turning away, heading back upstairs. "There's nothing to talk about, Margot. Just do what I say." I stood there, clutching the box, feeling as if the ground was shifting beneath my feet. This wasn't the man I had married. The Jacob I knew would never have spoken to me like that, would never have made such a huge decision without considering my feelings. Slowly, mechanically, I made my way upstairs to our bedroom, soon to be his parents' bedroom. I looked around at the space we had shared for so many years. The pale blue walls we had painted together, laughing and covered in splatters. The framed photo from our honeymoon in Hawaii, where we had promised to always be a team. The antique dresser I had restored, spending weekends sanding and varnishing while Jacob cheered me on. As I began to place our belongings into the box, each item felt like a piece of my heart being torn away. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't let Jacob see me cry. Not now. Hours passed as I worked, the tension in the house growing thicker with each passing minute. Jacob came in and out, barking orders and criticizing my progress. With each harsh word, I felt my patience wearing thinner. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, I heard the crunch of tires on our gravel driveway. Jacob's parents had arrived. I stood at the top of the stairs, watching as Jacob flung open the front door, all smiles and warm greetings. His mother, Ellen, a petite woman with Jacob's eyes, entered first, followed by his father, George, a tall man with a stern face and graying hair. "Welcome, welcome." Jacob's voice boomed, so different from the cold tone he had used with me all day. "Come on in, let me show you to your room." As they started up the stairs, Ellen's eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of something, concern, guilt, cross her face. But then Jacob was there, ushering them past me as if I were invisible. I retreated to the guest room, our new room, and sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. How had it come to this? When had I become a stranger in my own home? A soft knock on the door startled me. It was Ellen. "Margot, dear," she said, her voice gentle. "I hope we're not causing too much trouble. We really appreciate you and Jacob letting us stay." I looked up at her, forcing a smile. "Of course, Ellen. Your family." She hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but then Jacob called from downstairs, and she hurried away. As the evening wore on, I found myself going through the motions of being a good hostess. I helped prepare dinner, set the table, made small talk. But inside, I was screaming. After his parents had gone to bed, Jacob cornered me in the kitchen. "See? That wasn't so bad, was it?" he said, his tone condescending. Something in me snapped. "Not so bad," I hissed, keeping my voice low to avoid waking his parents. "Jacob, you've turned our lives upside down without even consulting me. I'm your wife, not your employee. I have a say in what happens in our home." His face darkened. "I told you, this isn't up for discussion. My parents needed a place to stay, and I made a decision. End of story. But it's not just your decision to make," I insisted, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I contribute just as much to this household as you do, more, even. I have a right to be part of these decisions." Jacob's eyes flashed dangerously. He took a step towards me, his voice low and menacing. "How dare you question me? I'm the man of this house. You'll do as I say and keep your mouth shut, Margot." I stood my ground, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. "No, Jacob. Not this time. I won't be silenced. We're supposed to be partners, equals. But you've been treating me like I'm nothing, like my feelings don't matter. I can't live like this anymore." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jacob's face contorted with rage, and before I could react, he shoved me hard in the stomach. I stumbled backward, my hip slamming painfully into the kitchen counter. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't believe what had just happened. The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob stood there, his chest heaving, a look of shock on his face as if he couldn't quite believe what he'd done either. In that moment, something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was something finally clicking into place. I realized with crystal clarity that this disrespect, this violence, was not something I could forgive or forget. Without a word, I pushed past Jacob and ran upstairs to the guest room. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and purse. I could hear Jacob calling my name, his voice a mixture of anger and panic, but I didn't stop. I flew down the stairs and out the front door, not even bothering to grab a coat. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It cleared my head, sharpened my resolve. I got into my car and started the engine, my mind racing. Where would I go? What would I do? But as I pulled out of the driveway, leaving Jacob standing on the porch, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay in that house another minute. As I drove through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, tears finally began to fall. But they weren't tears of sadness or fear. They were tears of relief, of release. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove for hours, with no real destination in mind. The city gave way to suburbs, then to rolling countryside. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I finally pulled into the parking lot of a small motel just off the highway. Exhausted but oddly energized, I checked in and collapsed on the bed in my small, shabby room. As I lay there, staring at the water-stained ceiling, I began to think about what came next. I had some savings, not much, but enough to keep me afloat for a while. I could stay here for a few days, figure out my next move. Maybe I could crash with my old college roommate, Sarah, who lived a few towns over. She'd always said I could count on her if I needed anything. As the events of the night replayed in my mind, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was fear, of course. Fear of the unknown, of starting over. But there was also a sense of excitement, of possibility. For so long, I had been living Jacob's life, bending to his will. Now, for the first time in years, I had the chance to live for myself. I must have dozed off because when I next opened my eyes, it was late afternoon. My phone, which I had turned off during my drive, was buzzing incessantly. Missed calls and messages from Jacob, from his parents, from our mutual friends. I ignored them all. Instead, I opened my laptop and began to research. Legal rights. Divorce proceedings. Women's shelters. With each piece of information I gathered, I felt stronger, more in control. As night fell once again, I made a decision. I wouldn't go back. Not this time. Jacob had crossed a line, and there was no going back from that. It wouldn't be easy, starting over at 35, but I knew it was necessary. I deserved better. I deserved a life where I was valued, respected, heard. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah. I would find a lawyer. I would start the process of reclaiming my life. But for tonight, I allowed myself to rest, to breathe, to begin to heal. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them. After all, I had already taken the hardest step. I had walked away. The road ahead might be uncertain, but one thing was clear: I, Margot, was finally free. The next morning, I woke up disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings of the motel room momentarily confusing me. As reality slowly seeped back in, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety wash over me. I was free, yes, but I was also alone and facing an uncertain future. I reached for my phone, hesitating before turning it on. As expected, it immediately buzzed with a flurry of notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, and text messages, all from Jacob, his parents, and a few mutual friends. I skimmed through them, my heart racing as I read Jacob's increasingly frantic and angry messages. "Margot, where are you? Come home right now. We need to talk. You're being ridiculous. Stop this nonsense and come back. If you don't come back, don't bother coming back at all." The last message made me pause. It was so typical of Jacob, trying to control me even now, thinking he could intimidate me into returning. But this time, his threats had the opposite effect. They only strengthened my resolve to stay away. I deleted all the messages and blocked Jacob's number. Then, taking a deep breath, I called Sarah. "Margot." Sarah's voice was thick with sleep. "Is everything okay? It's barely 7 a.m. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so early," I said, my voice shaking slightly. I left Jacob. Things got bad, and I couldn't stay anymore. I was wondering if I could crash at your place for a few days while I figure things out. There was a pause, and for a moment, I feared she might say no. But then she spoke, her voice filled with concern and determination. "Of course, honey. You can stay as long as you need. Where are you now? I'll come get you." Relief flooded through me. "I'm at a motel just outside of Worcester. I'll text you the address. Sit tight. I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, allowing myself a moment to breathe. I had a safe place to go. It wasn't much, but it was a start. While waiting for Sarah, I began to make a mental list of what I needed to do. Find a lawyer. Secure my financial assets. Look for a new place to live. The tasks seemed overwhelming, but I forced myself to take them one at a time. First, I logged into my personal bank account, the one Jacob didn't know about. I'd been squirreling away small amounts from each paycheck for years, telling myself it was for emergencies. I guess this qualified. The balance wasn't huge, but it was enough to keep me afloat for a few months if I was careful. Next, I searched for divorce lawyers in the area. The word divorce made my stomach churn, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't go back to Jacob, not after what had happened. I made a list of a few attorneys who specialized in cases involving domestic abuse, promising myself I'd call them first thing Monday morning. A knock on the door startled me out of my planning. Sarah stood there, her face etched with worry. Without a word, she pulled me into a tight hug. It was then, in the safety of my friend's arms, that I finally allowed myself to break down. All the fear, anger, and sadness I'd been holding back came pouring out in racking sobs. Sarah held me, murmuring soothing words until I calmed down. Then she helped me gather my few belongings and led me to her car. As we drove away from the motel, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I was leaving behind more than just a building. I was leaving behind a life that had become a prison. The drive to Sarah's apartment in Framingham was quiet. I stared out the window, watching the familiar Massachusetts landscape roll by. How many times had I driven these same roads with Jacob, planning our future together? Now, that future was gone, replaced by a blank canvas that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah's apartment was small but cozy, filled with colorful artwork and the scent of vanilla candles. She showed me to the spare room, apologizing for the clutter. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." I sat on the bed, overwhelmed by her kindness. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough. I promise I won't stay long. I just need some time to figure things out." She sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. "Margot, listen to me. You're my best friend. You can stay here as long as you want, no strings attached. Now, why don't you get some rest? We can talk more when you're ready." I nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was. As Sarah left the room, closing the door softly behind her, I lay back on the bed, letting the events of the past 24 hours wash over me. I must have fallen asleep because when I next opened my eyes, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. I could hear Sarah moving around in the kitchen, the smell of coffee wafting through the apartment. I joined her, accepting the steaming mug she offered with a grateful smile. We sat at her small kitchen table, and for a while, we just sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Sarah spoke. "Do you want to talk about it?" I took a deep breath, then began to tell her everything. The financial strain, Jacob's increasing controlling behavior, his parents moving in, and finally, the confrontation that had led to me leaving. Sarah listened without interrupting, her face a mix of shock and anger. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Margot, I'm so sorry you went through all that. But I'm proud of you for leaving. You did the right thing." Her words, simple as they were, lifted a weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying. I'd been so worried about what people would think, about being judged for walking away from my marriage. Hearing Sarah's support made me realize I wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Sarah's apartment became my command center. With her encouragement, I threw myself into planning my next steps. I called the lawyers on my list, eventually settling on a woman named Lisa who specialized in cases like mine. She was compassionate but firm, assuring me she would do everything in her power to protect my interests. I also reached out to my boss at the architecture firm, explaining my situation. To my relief, he was understanding, offering me the option to work remotely for a while until I got back on my feet. It was one less thing to worry about, and I was grateful for the stability my job provided. As the days passed, I began to feel stronger, more sure of myself. The fear and doubt that had plagued me in the early days after leaving Jacob began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of empowerment. I was making decisions for myself, charting my own course for the first time in years. One evening, about a week after I'd left, Sarah and I were sitting on her balcony, watching the sun set over the Framingham skyline. She turned to me, a thoughtful look on her face. "You know, Margot," she said, "I've been thinking. My lease is up in a couple of months. What do you say we look for a place together? A fresh start for both of us?" I was surprised by how much the idea appealed to me. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden." Sarah laughed. "A burden? Margot, having you here has been great. I forgot how much fun we had as roommates in college. Besides, this place is too small for both of us long term. We could find somewhere with more space, maybe even a little garden." As we spent the rest of the evening browsing apartment listings online, I felt a surge of excitement. This wasn't how I had imagined my life would go, but maybe, just maybe, it could be even better than what I had planned. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how much had changed in such a short time. I had walked away from a life that was suffocating me, faced my fears, and was now on the brink of a new beginning. There were still challenges ahead, the divorce proceedings, facing Jacob again, rebuilding my life, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face them. I was Margot, and I was writing my own story now. Whatever came next, I knew I had the strength to handle it. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities, and I couldn't wait to see what it would bring. While I was starting my new life with Sarah, Jacob was facing the consequences of his actions back at his house. I didn't witness what happened next, but I heard about it later from Ellen, Jacob's mother, who reached out to me a few weeks after I left. This is how she described that day. Jacob had spent the night pacing, alternating between calling my phone and sending increasingly angry text messages. As morning broke, he finally collapsed into an uneasy sleep on the couch, still clutching his phone. Ellen and George tiptoed around him, exchanging worried glances. They had heard the argument, the sound of someone hitting the counter. But they had been too afraid, too unsure to intervene. Now, seeing their son sprawled on the couch, dark circles under his eyes, they felt a mix of concern and disappointment. "Should we wake him?" George whispered to his wife. Ellen shook her head. "Let him sleep. We need to talk about what happened last night." They retreated to the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones over cups of coffee. Ellen wanted to call the police, report me missing. George argued against it, saying they didn't know the whole story. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Jacob jerked awake at the noise, hope flaring in his eyes. "Margot," he called out, stumbling to the front door. But it wasn't me. It was Jacob's boss, Mark, looking confused and a little annoyed. "Jacob, what's going on? You didn't show up for the Henderson meeting, and you're not answering your phone. The client is furious." Jacob blinked, trying to process the information. He had completely forgotten about work, about life outside of my disappearance. Margot's gone," he said, his voice hoarse. "She left last night. I've been trying to find her." Mark's annoyance softened into concern. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" As Jacob fumbled for an explanation, Ellen stepped in. "There was an argument last night," she said quietly. "It got physical. Margot left, and we haven't heard from her since." Mark's eyes widened, darting between Jacob and his parents. "Physical? Jacob, did you?" He couldn't finish the sentence, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Jacob's face crumpled. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. "I was angry, and I pushed her. God, what have I done?" Mark took a deep breath, clearly struggling with what he'd just heard. "Jacob, I think you should take some time off. Sort this out. I'll handle the Henderson account." As Mark turned to leave, he paused. "And Jacob, get some help. This isn't okay." The rest of the day passed in a haze for Jacob. He alternated between bouts of frantic activity, calling mutual friends, checking local hospitals, and periods of despondent silence. Ellen and George watched helplessly, unsure how to handle this version of their son they barely recognized. As evening approached, Jacob seemed to rally. He showered, shaved, and put on fresh clothes. "Mom, Dad," he announced, "I'm going to fix this. I'll apologize to Margot, beg her to come home if I have to. Everything will be okay." Ellen and George exchanged worried glances but said nothing. They watched as Jacob bustled around the master bedroom, their bedroom now, straightening things, fluffing pillows, as if preparing for my return. It was George who noticed it first. A folded piece of paper taped to the inside of the closet door. "Jacob," he called out, "what's this?" Jacob turned, his face paling as he saw the note. With trembling hands, he unfolded it and began to read aloud. "Jacob, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not just from the house, but from your life. What happened last night made me realize that I can't stay with you anymore. It's not safe, and it's not healthy. This room is no longer yours. Neither am I. Goodbye forever." Margot. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Jacob read and reread the note, as if hoping the words would change. But they remained the same, a stark testament to the consequences of his actions. Ellen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Jacob," she whispered, "what have you done?" Jacob didn't respond. He just stood there, the note clutched in his hand, staring blankly at the closet door. It was as if all the fight had suddenly gone out of him. George cleared his throat awkwardly. "Son, maybe we should go home. Give you some space to figure things out." This seemed to snap Jacob out of his trance. "No," he exclaimed, whirling to face his parents. "No, you can't leave. You have to stay. Margot will come back, she has to. And when she does, everything needs to be perfect." Ellen stepped forward, reaching out to touch Jacob's arm. "Honey, I don't think dash," but Jacob jerked away from her touch. "It's fine," he insisted, his voice taking on a manic edge. "Everything's fine. Margot's just upset. She'll cool down and come home. You'll see." Over the next few days, Jacob's behavior became increasingly erratic. He would spend hours meticulously cleaning the house, preparing elaborate meals that no one ate, all while insisting that I would return at any moment. He refused to go to work, ignored calls from friends, and snapped at his parents whenever they suggested that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't coming back. Ellen and George watched their son spiral with growing alarm. They had come to stay with Jacob and me to be closer to family, to enjoy their retirement in the company of loved ones. Instead, they found themselves in the middle of a crumbling marriage, witnesses to their son's unraveling. A week after I left, Ellen finally worked up the courage to call me. She caught me just as I was leaving my lawyer's office, finalizing the details of the restraining order I was filing against Jacob. "Margot," her voice was hesitant, tinged with a mix of relief and worry. "It's Ellen. We've been so worried about you." I felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, I knew Ellen and George weren't to blame for Jacob's actions. "I'm okay, Ellen," I assured her. "I'm safe." There was a pause, and I could almost hear the unasked questions hanging in the air between us. Finally, Ellen spoke again. "Jacob's not doing well, Margot. He's not himself. I think he needs help." I closed my eyes, pushing down the instinctive urge to rush back and fix things. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. "I'm sorry, Ellen," I said softly. "But I can't be the one to help him." "Not anymore." Ellen's voice broke. "I understand. I wish things were different." As we ended the call, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the pain Jacob was going through, guilt for the position I'd put his parents in, but also a renewed sense of conviction that I'd made the right choice in leaving. That evening, I told Sarah about the call. She listened patiently, then pulled me into a hug. "You did the right thing, Margot," she said firmly. "Jacob's actions are not your responsibility. You need to focus on healing and moving forward." And she was right. As much as a part of me wanted to rush back and make everything okay, I knew that wasn't possible. The note I'd left on the closet door wasn't just a goodbye to Jacob, it was a goodbye to the person I used to be, the one who would have stayed despite the danger, who would have put everyone else's needs before her own. I was writing a new story now, one where I was the main character, not just a supporting role in someone else's life. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when the weight of my decisions felt overwhelming. But then I would remember the feeling of Jacob's hands on me, the fear and helplessness I'd felt in that moment, and I knew I was on the right path. The note on the door had been my declaration of independence. Now it was time to live up to those words. The weeks following my departure from Jacob were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and self-discovery. I threw myself into rebuilding my life, determined to create a future that was truly my own. My first order of business was securing my legal and financial situation. Lisa, my lawyer, was a godsend during this time. She guided me through the process of filing for divorce and obtaining a restraining order against Jacob. "It's just a precaution," she assured me when I hesitated about the restraining order. "Given his behavior, it's better to be safe than sorry." I also had to disentangle my finances from Jacob's. This proved to be a complex and often frustrating process. We had shared accounts, joint investments, and the house mortgage to sort out. I was grateful for the secret savings account I had maintained over the years. It provided me with a financial cushion during this tumultuous time. My boss at the architecture firm continued to be understanding, allowing me to work remotely while I sorted out my personal life. I threw myself into my projects, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of drafting and design. The work helped keep my mind occupied during the day, preventing me from dwelling too much on the upheaval in my personal life. Living with Sarah was a blessing. Her unwavering support and the comfort of having a friend close by helped me through the darkest moments. We fell into an easy routine, sharing meals, watching movies, and talking late into the night. It reminded me of our college days, but with a newfound depth to our friendship forged by the trials I was facing. However, not all of my friends were as supportive as Sarah. As news of my separation from Jacob spread, I was surprised and hurt by some of the reactions. People I had considered close friends suddenly became distant, uncomfortable with the reality of what had happened. Some even suggested that I was overreacting, that I should give Jacob another chance. "Maybe it was just a one-time thing," my friend Rachel said over coffee one day. "You've been together for so long. Are you sure you want to throw it all away?" Her words stung, but they also strengthened my resolve. "It wasn't just about that one moment, Rachel," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "It was about years of disrespect, of feeling unvalued and unheard. I deserve better than that." Rachel didn't seem convinced, but I realized I no longer needed her approval. I was learning to trust my own judgment, to stand firm in my decisions. While I was rebuilding my life, Jacob was struggling to accept the new reality. Despite the restraining order, he made several attempts to contact me. He left voicemails ranging from tearful apologies to angry accusations. I listened to the first few, my heart aching at the pain in his voice, before deciding it was healthier for me not to engage at all. Ellen kept me updated on Jacob's situation, though I hadn't asked her to. She seemed to need someone to talk to, and I couldn't bring myself to cut her off completely. Through her, I learned that Jacob had finally taken a leave of absence from work and had started seeing a therapist. He's trying to change, Margot, Ellen told me during one of our calls. He realizes now how badly he treated you. He wants to make amends. I sighed, feeling a familiar mix of guilt and frustration. I'm glad he's getting help, Ellen. But it doesn't change what happened between us. I hope he can heal and grow, but it can't be for my sake. It has to be for himself. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel more settled in my new life. Sarah and I found a lovely 2-bedroom apartment with a small balcony where we could grow herbs and flowers. The process of furnishing and decorating our new space was cathartic, allowing me to express myself in ways I hadn't been able to in years. I also started to rediscover old passions that I had let fall by the wayside during my marriage. I joined a local book club, started taking yoga classes, and even signed up for a pottery workshop. Each new activity helped me reconnect with parts of myself that I had almost forgotten existed. One Sunday morning, as I was tending to our little balcony garden, I had a moment of clarity. The sun was warm on my face, the scent of basil and rosemary filled the air, and I realized I was happy. Not just getting by, not just surviving, but genuinely happy. The realization brought tears to my eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of joy. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still difficult days, moments when the weight of everything that had happened threatened to overwhelm me. The divorce proceedings dragged on, with Jacob contesting every point, making the process more painful and drawn out than it needed to be. There were nights when I lay awake, doubting my decisions, wondering if I had tried hard enough to make my marriage work. But then I would remember the fear I felt that night in the kitchen, the years of feeling small and unimportant, and I knew I had made the right choice. My healing process wasn't just about moving on from Jacob, it was also about confronting my own role in our dysfunctional relationship. Through therapy, I began to understand why I had stayed for so long, why I had allowed myself to be treated that way. It was hard, painful work, but with each session, I felt stronger, more self-aware. As I approached the 6-month mark of my new life, I received an unexpected call from George, Jacob's father. His voice was gruff and uncomfortable as he spoke. Margot, I owe you an apology, he said. We should have done something that night. We should have stepped in, should have seen what was happening. I'm sorry we failed you. I was stunned into silence for a moment, overwhelmed by his words. Thank you, George, I finally managed to say. That means a lot to me. After we hung up, I sat on the balcony, letting the conversation sink in. It felt like closure of sorts, an acknowledgement of the pain I had endured. It didn't erase what had happened, but it helped soothe a wound I hadn't even realized was still raw. That evening, as Sarah and I shared a bottle of wine and watched the sunset from our balcony, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. My life wasn't perfect, there were still challenges to face, wounds still healing, but I was on the right path. You know, Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast, I'm really proud of you, Margot. You've come so far. I clinked my glass against hers, smiling. Thanks, Sarah. For everything. I couldn't have done this without you. As the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the journey I had been on. From the fear and uncertainty of that night 6 months ago to the strength and independence I felt now, it had been a transformative experience. I knew there would still be difficult days ahead. The divorce wasn't finalized yet, and I was sure there would be more hurdles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. I was writing my own story now, and the possibilities were endless. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, I made a silent promise to myself. No matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them with courage and self-respect. I was Margot, survivor, friend, architect, and so much more. And I was ready for whatever came next. As the 1-year anniversary of my departure from Jacob approached, I found myself in a reflective mood. So much had changed in those 12 months. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had fled our house in the middle of the night, terrified and uncertain. I decided to mark the occasion by taking a solo trip to Cape Cod. Sarah offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I needed to do alone. It was time to fully embrace my independence, to prove to myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. The small beachfront cottage I rented was a far cry from the luxurious vacations Jacob and I used to take, but as I stepped onto the sand on my first morning there, I felt a sense of freedom that no 5-star resort could ever provide. I spent my days walking along the shoreline, collecting seashells, and watching the waves crash against the rocks. In the evenings, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, sketching the landscape and jotting down my thoughts in a journal. It was on one of these quiet evenings that I received an email from Lisa, my lawyer. The subject line read, "Divorce finalized." My heart raced as I opened it, scanning the contents quickly. It was done. After months of negotiations and paperwork, I was officially divorced from Jacob. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun sink below the horizon, processing the news. It wasn't the future I had imagined for myself when I said I do all those years ago, but I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and closure. That night, I dreamt of the ocean. In my dream, I was swimming, carried by gentle waves towards a distant shore. When I woke, I felt refreshed, as if the dream had washed away the last lingering doubts and regrets. Returning home from Cape Cod, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. The time away had not only rejuvenated me but had also sparked new ideas for my designs. I presented a bold new concept for an eco-friendly community center to my firm, and to my delight, they loved it. For the first time in my career, I was given the lead on a major project. As I immersed myself in the planning and design of the community center, I found myself thinking more and more about my own place in the community. I had been so focused on my personal healing and growth that I hadn't given much thought to how I could use my experiences to help others. On a whim, I reached out to a local women's shelter, offering to volunteer my time. They were thrilled to have an architect on board and asked if I would be willing to help redesign their living spaces to be more welcoming and functional. I threw myself into the project with enthusiasm, working evenings and weekends to create a design that would transform the shelter into a true haven for women in need. As I worked, I couldn't help but think of how close I had come to needing such a place myself. The day the renovations were complete, I stood in the newly redesigned common area, surrounded by the shelter staff and residents. As I listened to their words of gratitude and saw the hope in their eyes, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was more than just a project, it was a way to turn my pain into something positive, to help others who were walking the difficult path I had traveled. One of the residents, a young woman named Tessa, approached me after the ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Thank you," she said softly. "This place, it feels like a home now. Like there's hope, you know?" I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "I do know," I replied. "And there is hope. You're stronger than you know." As I drove home that evening, I realized that I had found a new purpose. My experience had given me a unique perspective, one that I could use to make a real difference in people's lives. In the months that followed, I continued to volunteer at the shelter, offering not just my design skills but also my time as a listener and supporter for the women there. Their stories of resilience and courage inspired me daily, reminding me of my own strength and how far I had come. It was through my work at the shelter that I met Daniel, a kind-hearted social worker with a quick wit and an easy smile. We bonded over our shared passion for helping others, and soon found ourselves spending more and more time together outside of the shelter. At first, I was hesitant to open my heart again. The wounds from my marriage to Jacob, though healed, had left their scars. But Daniel was patient and understanding, never pushing me beyond what I was comfortable with. Our first date was a picnic in the park, nothing fancy or intimidating. As we sat on the blanket, sharing sandwiches and stories, I felt a spark of something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the simple joy of connecting with someone on a deep level. As our relationship grew, I was amazed at how different it felt from what I had with Jacob. Daniel listened when I spoke, valued my opinions, and supported my ambitions. We were partners in the truest sense of the word, each encouraging the other to grow and pursue our passions. One evening, as we walked hand in hand along the Charles River, Daniel turned to me with a serious expression. "Margot," he said, "I want you to know that I understand your past. I know you've been hurt, and I want you to know that I will always respect your boundaries and your independence. You're an incredible woman, and I'm honored to be a part of your life." His words brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had been afraid that my past would define me, that I would never be able to trust or love again. But here was this wonderful man, seeing me for who I truly was and loving me not in spite of my past, but because of the strength it had given me. As our first year together drew to a close, Daniel and I decided to move in together. The decision wasn't made lightly. We had many long conversations about what it would mean, about our expectations and fears. But in the end, it felt right. The day we moved the last of my things into our new apartment, I found myself standing on the balcony, looking out over the city. So much had changed in the 2 years since I had left Jacob. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up, rediscovered my passion for my work, found new ways to contribute to my community, and opened my heart to love again. Sarah joined me on the balcony, handing me a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. I clinked my glass against hers, smiling. To new beginnings, and to the journey that brought us here. As the sun set over Boston, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. The path hadn't been easy, but every step had led me to this moment, to this life that was truly my own. I thought about the frightened woman who had fled her home in the middle of the night, the one who had left that note on the closet door. She seemed like a different person now, a chapter in a book that had led to this beautiful new story. As I turned to join Daniel and our friends inside, I paused for a moment, taking one last look at the cityscape before me. I had once thought that leaving Jacob meant leaving behind everything I knew, everything I was. But now I understood that it had been the first step towards becoming who I was always meant to be. I was Margot, architect, friend, volunteer, partner, survivor. And my story was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning.